So moving ahead with question number 3, can we see a simple example of a unit test for database operation? Now, normally when we talk about projects, they always have insert, update, delete kind of operation. So in this video, we'll try to understand that how we can do unit testing both using NUnit as well as Visual Studio unit test for insert, update, delete kind of operations. So here's a simple table I have, customer table, which has 3 properties, 3 fields: customer ID, customer code, and customer name. I have created a simple class called a CLS customer, which basically makes an insert onto the customer table. So you can see that it has 2 properties, customer code and customer name. Now, the customer code property is a compulsory property. So in other words, if you do not pass value to the customer code, if you pass nothing to the customer code, it will throw an exception. In the same way, customer name is also a compulsory property. So in case you do not pass a customer name, it will throw up an exception saying customer name is compulsory. And then finally, I have an add function or add method, which basically makes insert into the customer table. Now we'll be doing unit testing on this class using both NUnit as well as Visual Studio unit test. So let's see that how we can do unit testing using NUnit, and then we will move towards Visual Studio test. So let's first start with NUnit. So I have created a simple method here called as test customer insert. Now test customer insert method basically creates the object of the customer class. It passes the customer code, it passes the customer name, and then calls up the add method. Now if you remember the validations by the customer class, basically if you do not pass the customer code, it will throw an exception. If you do not pass the customer name, it will throw an exception. Right. So in case if both the rules are followed properly, in other words, if you pass a proper customer code and a proper customer name, it will make an insert into the table. Now in order to check saying that whether this test has passed or not, I'm making a simple I've created a simple get customer function here, which basically makes a call to the database and fetches the record which has been recently inserted. So if you see over here, this get customer function basically takes in the recently inserted customer code and gets a data set outside, and then we check that if the data set, if the value of if the customer code value in the data set is same as the customer code which we had provided for testing, and if the customer name value is same as the customer name value which we have provided for testing. So if both of these asserts are equal, or if both of the asserts are true, then the test case passes. Now we have also provided here a test case source. So what I've done is that I have provided here a simple test case source which basically has 4 conditions. The first condition is that you do not pass anything. The second condition is that I just pass the customer code but I don't pass the customer name. The third condition, I pass the customer name but I don't pass the customer code. And the fourth one is where I pass everything proper. So I have 4 test case conditions here. The first 3 test case should fail while the last test case should pass. So this test case source is input to my test customer insert method. So now let's run this test in NUnit and see that how it looks like. So here's my loaded unit test case which we have just written, which we have just discussed. So here's the test customer insert, and this is the same unit test case we just talked about. So we have loaded the unit test case now in the NUnit UI, and you can also see the test cases. You can see the 4 test cases which we have written in our program is also visible on the NUnit UI. So the first 3 test cases should fail and the last test case should pass. So let's do a run on this and let's see what happens. So you can see that passed 1 and errors 3. So in other words, we have 3 failures and we have 1 success. So if you really see, the test customer insert with both customer code and customer name have passed while the other tests have failed. So if you look at the first test case, you will see that for the first test case is saying customer code is compulsory. For the second test case it is saying customer name is compulsory, while for the third test case it is again saying customer code is compulsory. The first 3 test cases have failed and the last test case has passed. If you go to the database now, you can see that there is one insert which has been made, and that is the proper data with both customer code and customer name. So now So this is how we can, this is how we do basically database testing using NUnit. Now let's see that how we can do this, the same customer code and customer name unit test using Visual Studio Team System Test. So now let's try to do the same unit testing using Visual Studio Test. So in other words, let's try to test the same customer class using Visual Studio VSTS unit test framework. So the first thing what I've done is that I have created 4 test cases in a simple table. So basically the first test case has both the customer code and the customer name. So this is a valid test case and this test case should pass. The second test case doesn't have a customer code, so this test case will fail. The third test case will also fail because it doesn't have a customer name. The fourth test case will also fail because it doesn't have either the customer code or the customer name. So what I've done is that I have created 4 test cases with various combinations. Now let's see that how we can execute these test cases on our VSTS unit test class. So here's my class, my unit test class, and in that I have created a simple method called as test customer insert. Now in order to pass the test data to my method, to my unit test method, I've used something called as a data source. So in the data source I have passed the database name, that is test data, and I have passed the customer table which has the test data. Right. Now what happens is that when the unit test VSTS unit test runs this test, it for every test case value here, it makes a method call to the test customer insert method. Now in order to access the column values, in order to access the customer code and customer name value, in order to access these values, the column values, we need to use test context.data row customer code. So with this, you can access the customer code and the customer name value. So what I've done here is that I've created a customer class object. I have passed in the customer code and customer name value to the properties, to the appropriate properties, and I have called the add method. And then I have, okay, once you call the add method and if everything is proper, it will make an insert into the database, into the customer table. So what I've done is that I have created a get customer function which basically returns me the value which I have recently inserted, and then I'm checking for the equality for the customer code and customer name value with the test context data row value. So if the customer code and customer name are inserted and if they are equal to the test data value, that means this test has passed. So now let's try to run this test and let's see that how unit test will execute this test. So we have 4 combinations of data. We expect the first test case to pass and the remaining to fail. So now let's go and run our test case. Now in this class I have other test cases also. For example, you can see that I have test method 1, test method data driven, and then the test case which we want to execute, that is test customer insert. But we are really interested in running this test case. We are not at this moment interested in running the other 2 test cases. So in order to execute a particular test case from a class, you can go to test, go to Windows, and go to test list editor. So here you can see all the loaded tests which you have in your class. Now we are not selecting the other test cases, we are just selecting test customer insert test case which we are interested in. So at this moment we are just interested in test customer insert. So I have selected the same in the test list editor. So let's go right click on this and let's say run checked test. Now from our 4 test cases we expect 1 to pass and the other ones to fail. So that's the one which is passed and all the other ones have failed. So you can see that the customer code is compulsory for the first one, the second one customer name is compulsory, and the third one again customer code is compulsory. So in this way all the remaining 3 test cases have failed while one of the test case has passed. And if you go to the customer table, you will see it has inserted one record which has both customer code as well as a customer name. So in this way you can run your database unit test using Visual Studio unit test, Visual Studio unit test framework as well as NUnit. I hope you enjoyed this video. In the coming up sessions we will concentrate more on automated testing, and then we will move towards database testing, and then finally we'll go towards performance testing. So the coming up videos will be more concentrated on automated testing, performance testing, and database unit testing.